Welcome to lecture number 14, The Impending Crisis. Many believed the Mexican War would unite the nation as America acquired valuable territories and resources. Instead, the question of whether or not slavery would expand into these new regions tore the country apart by 1861. Politics during the 1850s were strife with controversy. This lecture will address politics of this era by first addressing a major compromise reached between different factions in 1850. It prevented war in that year, but following the compromise, a series of crises slowly led the nation closer to war. On the right, we see a cover of a best-selling book which heightened tension between supporters and opponents of slavery. Immediately following the Mexican War, a series of political controversies seemed to come to a head. We will explore some of those controversies and how they were resolved through compromise. The first two controversies dealt with land acquired during the Mexican War. First, would slavery expand into these new territories? Secondly, what would happen with Texas and California? Texas was claiming parts of New Mexico and other regions. It also had developed a large national debt. California had applied for statehood. Would Congress let it be organized as a state? The yellow and orange areas, which are circled on this map, represent territories acquired during the 1840s. The question was, would slavery expand there? Remember that controversy the Texans had with Mexico over their proper boundary? The lines indicated in black roughly outlined the claims Texans continued to make after it entered the Union. Another controversy was also raised, which had been developing for some time. Some Americans felt the existence of slavery in the nation's capital was embarrassing for the nation as diplomats visited the country from overseas. Others had no problem with slavery's existence there. Different groups of Americans had their own solutions to these problems facing the nation. Some Americans supported free soil. They argued all new territory acquired by the United States should be free from slavery. Politically, this issue of slavery's expansion into the Southwest had been raised on the eve of the Mexican War by the Wilmot Proviso. This amendment to a spending bill declared that any territory acquired by the United States from Mexico be free from slavery. It was defeated, but Free Soilers would have supported this proposal. A second group were supporters of a concept called popular sovereignty. This would allow people living in the new territories to decide for themselves if they wanted slavery to be legal or illegal where they lived. Finally, other Americans wanted to solve this problem by extending the Missouri Compromise line all the way to the Pacific Ocean. The area circled on this map shows the original Missouri Compromise line. When this was implemented by Congress in the 1820s, it stipulated that slavery could not exist north of this line in the Louisiana Territory. This additional black line would demonstrate an extension of the Missouri Compromise line, which some groups supported. The question was, who could develop a compromise? Compromise had been the foundation of the American political system since the Constitutional Convention. This cartoon on the right makes fun of President Zachary Taylor trying to balance the concerns of the South versus the Wilmot Proviso. Into this quagmire stepped none other than Henry Clay, the great compromiser. At age 73, he worked to gain consensus on a wide range of proposals, but even the great compromiser failed. Up stepped another politician, a member of the Senate from Illinois, whose name was Stephen Douglas. In the end, Douglas successfully led what came to be known as the Compromise of 1850 through Congress. Clay's original proposal had several provisions. Everyone found something to dislike in it. Douglas succeeded by breaking the compromise down into smaller bills. Overall, the Compromise of 1850 had 5 primary provisions. First, California entered the Union as a free state. Secondly, the rest of the American Southwest was divided into 2 territories, Utah and New Mexico. Slavery in these 2 territories would be determined by popular sovereignty. Most of California's residents did not support the expansion of slavery anyway, as prospectors did not want slave owners to arrive with hundreds of slaves ready to dig for gold. The area in the red box identifies the new territories of Utah and New Mexico. The third provision dealt with Texas. Texans finally agreed to drop their claims for additional territory, and the current boundaries of Texas were established. In return, the United States assumed the debt Texas had developed under its independence as the Lone Star Republic. This is the slide shown earlier, where the area outlined in black identifies the territory initially claimed by the state of Texas. This map shows the smaller border of Texas after it gave up its claims to other territory. The region in black illustrates the rough boundaries of Texas' original claims. The final two provisions of the compromise dealt with slavery specifically. The slave trade, but not slavery itself, was prohibited in Washington, D.C., but slavery would continue to be legal. And finally, a stricter fugitive slave law was put into effect for the entire nation. Here's one final look at that map of the nation in 1850. As you can see, even though a crisis was averted, the nation was becoming more divided. In northern regions, shown in green, slavery was prohibited. In southern regions, shown in yellow, slavery was legal. And in the red, we see slavery would be determined by popular sovereignty. While the country did remain divided, the compromise was significant. It was important because it prevented war, if only for 10 years, but it's still significant because it showed that through compromise, the American political system could survive. Over those next 10 years, the northern states grew in population and its industrial power in comparison to the South. Following the passage of the compromise, the nation faced a series of crises which eventually took the country one step closer to war. The first crisis involved one of the provisions of the compromise itself, the new fugitive slave law. The law included three key provisions. First, all runaway slaves had to be returned to their owners. This was nothing new, but it targeted recent runaways as well as people who had escaped to freedom years earlier. Secondly, it became illegal to aid a runaway slave, so whites, opposed to slavery, could face jail time or fines. This map identifies the many routes taken by slaves as they escaped slavery. It's nearly impossible to determine how many slaves actually escaped on the Underground Railroad, but both supporters and opponents of slavery acknowledged its existence. In a final key provision, accused runaways were denied a jury trial. Instead, a judge decided their fate. Magistrates involved received $10 for ruling in favor of the slave owner and $5 for ruling in support of the accused runaway. These seem to be violations of fundamental American rights. The fugitive slave law was important because it absolutely infuriated opponents of slavery in the North and turned many moderates toward the anti-slavery ranks. It also demonstrated slavery was a national problem, not one simply isolated to one region of the country. For more information about the fugitive slave law, you may click on one of the hyperlinks below. The next crisis involved a book published in 1852 written by Harriet Beecher Stowe.